Good morning, gentlemen. I am out again, as you obviously know. Um, I didn't want to waste another day without at least being able to communicate some information to you, so that is what this particular video is. When I return, which I'm really hoping will be tomorrow on Wednesday, you will have your quiz, which will be on those study questions on Lesson 3, Module 4 that I left behind that you undoubtedly completed is really straightforward. Um, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just quickly go over what those major points were and then go over the responses with you as well so that to make sure that you're absolutely prepared because it's not fair with me being out to pop a quiz upon you. So the chapter is really short, and the next chapter is really long. So I didn't want to get you started on the other chapter. But Thomas Paine, who was only merely alluded to in the previous unit, comes to the forefront of our attention here. And this pamphlet, Common Sense, as it tells you in the textbook, was written for the common man, men who would shed their blood in rebellion. And what it was asking for, as you can see from these notes, obviously, are that citizens would make laws, not kings and queens. Asked for economic freedom, the right to military self-defense, and spoke out against tyranny or against a tyrant, and that would be the abuse of government power. Now, the whole thing with Thomas Paine writing for the common man, and he wrote in very plain language, was so that he would inspire ordinary men to want to rebel. There's a big difference between using really fancy elevated language and it's just not going to reach you versus being able to kind of like communicate with the people who actually need to take action. And we saw that for example, the militia was made up of just very ordinary men and oftentimes not particularly great soldiers, as we'll see in the next section. And George Washington, as the military leader, wasn't particularly proud of them until the very end when he was. Thomas Paine's impact, so he's brutal toward the king and toward the idea that things would end well. He had argued calmly and reasonably. He used loaded language to appeal to emotions, right? That's one of the questions. Not necessarily to reason. Oftentimes things are marketed, commercials are marketed to our emotions and not to our actual like logic or a reason, right? So you buy a, a an Apple product because it's supposed to be cool, not because they never try to market it to you because it's something that's like like it has the best camera or it tells you about some kind of like graphics or processor. Those are kind of important, but it's the idea of like having the particular product and surrounding it with people that can market it well, that appeals to you. So appealing to emotions is especially effective. He had to inspire the common man to reach for the musket above the fireplace, right? So it's the common man who's going to be fighting. He reached across the seas and was translated into French, Dutch, and German. He came to America only within a few months of having published this pamphlet, and within 3 months, 120,000 copies were sold, read by as many as 1 million people. Next, from there we have independence being declared. So on July 2nd, 1776, right, the date that doesn't really get celebrated, the Second Continental Congress declared its independence from Great Britain. However, it wasn't formally adopted until the 4th, and it wasn't even signed by everyone until like August 2nd. So there was a 5-member team that prepared the declaration, and that included John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston, and Thomas Jefferson. But Thomas Jefferson is the primary composer of the Declaration of Independence. There's a great video on TED-Ed. You know how much I love these. That gives us all this information about the Declaration of Independence. We'll review this when I come back on Wednesday after you take your test. The main ideas of the Declaration of Independence are that all people possess unalienable rights, including the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Very famous lines there. Unalienable means that they cannot be separated from, right? That these are inherently ours, that we are born with these rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And therefore, to have anyone take them away from us is tyrannical. King George III, who we've seen so much of, and his heavy involvement in the colonies and the different forms of taxation, the Proclamation of 1763, and other laws that he tried to put into place that really just offended the colonists and put them over the edge. So remember that the complaints were that he violated the colonists' rights by taxing them without their consent, right? Taxation without representation. He passed unfair laws with colonial governments. And then stationing a large British army with the colonies was also a burden to the colonists. And the last part, the colonies had the right to break from Britain. Governments and rulers must protect the rights of citizens. In exchange, the people agree to be governed. Jefferson argued that King George had broken the social contract, right? So the social contract there is really the main term or idea, and it's actually one of the answers to one of your exam or study questions. So on July 4th, 1776, the Continental Congress approved the Declaration of Independence, and hence we have our Independence Day on July 4th. The textbook also reintroduces the word loyalist as a term for the colonists who were sided with the British instead of with the Patriots. They're also called Tories. We'll start to see the word Tories reappear a little bit more in subsequent chapters, but oftentimes that really applies more to European history. The textbook also tells us, here's the actual details on it that are not in the textbook, that there were more patriots than loyalists. We approximate that there were about 45% of the Americans were patriots and only about 20 to 30 were loyalists, and that was pretty much universally true from colony to colony. The America's Hypocrisy, again, one of my questions. It speaks about independence for all men, but it does not address women, enslaved Africans, and Native Americans, who get a lot of attention there at the end of the last two chapters about Native Americans, especially, and ways that the colonists violated the rights of those Native Americans. Here we have another image of Hamilton, which we're going to have to find a way to get you to see this without using up too much class time, because I think it's just such a fantastic play. And then in that play, the character of Angelica sings this line about, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And when I meet Thomas Jefferson, I'm going to compel him to include women in the sequel," which again addresses the fact that women were not specifically addressed. Now, Angelica, this character, this actual historical figure, is not the one that's the answer to the question in the study packet. Additional contradictions. This was addressed in a chapter in Stamped, and this actually I think is out of one of my slides in Stamped, and I have a video here. So we remember Thomas Jefferson as a progressive person who called out against slavery, but he was himself a slave owner, and we know that he fathered several children by a woman that he owned. Kind of a crazy word there, that he owned. And there's more information on all of this in this particular slide, which I'll eventually get to with you. For the purposes of your test tomorrow, if you didn't do this for some reason and you've got a lifeline, I can go over these answers with you, right? So in January of 1776, Thomas Paine published a pamphlet called Common Sense. It argued for independence of the American colonies. Thomas Paine argued that citizens, not kings and queens, should make laws. So those are those next three spaces. Loaded language is powerful words and phrases used to persuade people by appealing to their emotions. Common Sense made a strong case for economic freedom in the colonies and for the right to military self-defense. It also cried out against tyranny, the abuse of government power. The Second Continental Congress created a Latin motto for the new country, E Pluribus Unum, which means out of many, one. That was number 5. Number 6, Thomas Jefferson was the main author of the Declaration of Independence. All people possess, number 7, unalienable rights, including the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. King George violated the colonists' rights by taxing them without their consent. King George III had broken the social contract, which maintained that kings and queens must protect the rights of citizens. Loyalists were those colonists who chose to side with the British. In every colony, there were more patriots than loyalists. For 10, it's not really a fill in the blank, but the Declaration of Independence declared that all men are created equally. This was not true. What were the groups that were not entitled to these same rights? So you'd want to be able to identify, for example, that women, Native Americans, and enslaved Africans were not provided with any of these same rights. And it was number 11, John Adams's wife, Abigail Adams, that stated that we hold not ourselves bound by laws in which we have no voice or representation. I think that the most amazing part of that particular line is that those are the very reasons that the other colonists wanted to be separated from Great Britain. They would not accept laws if they did not have a voice in those laws or representation and voted in the people who would be making those laws. How the colonists quietly violated the rights of the Native Americans. So that's at the tail end of your chapter on page 123 in the top right. And that obviously addresses the fact that the colonists continue to couch themselves, sit on Native American lands, even though they had been told not to. We remember the Proclamation of 1763 with King George III had also told the colonists not to move west of the Appalachians. The colonists obviously didn't listen. King George wasn't doing it to be like pro-Native American. He was just simply wanted to protect the East Coast. So it's not like he was doing it out of any good intentions. And then the last analysis question, which I addressed, why would Thomas Paine use common language when writing common sense? And what I addressed before is that by using common language, he appeals to a much wider audience, people that needed to hear this message, people that needed to basically be impacted by these words, and to then, would be the ones who would pick up the musket above the fireplace and then go out and fight against the British Army. The assignment that I left for you today is relatively short and straightforward. I've even made it a little bit easier, so you're going to read this particular page. It goes over on the actual assignment, ask you to identify some important dates and then to fill in information for each of those dates that are relevant to them. So what I've done is I'm making this a little bit easier. So if you're watching this video, you know the dates that I want. September 1774, add that comma. April 19, 1775, May 1775, June 11, 1776, and July 4th, 1776. The last one you can pretty much figure out. What I've done is just to make it a little bit easier for you, is I've also, in this video, highlighted where each of those different momentous events occurred. You should read through the whole thing so that everything has context. This won't take you too long. And it's pretty much just a review of what you have already done. The other page that I've left you is a little bit of review and a little bit flash forward into what we'll be looking at on Wednesday and Thursday, which is lesson 4, which is much longer, has a bunch of different battles that are mentioned. We really get to see the defeat of Washington's army, which happens in New York, and then his victory at Trenton in New Jersey. And that famous image of Washington crossing the Delaware River. Now, the questions for this, however, are mostly not about the information, which is all super important, but it asks you questions about like how the page is structured. So place the check mark next to the text features used in the section. So is there a title? Is there a heading, subheading, italicized print, boldface print, bullets, photograph? Clearly no, right? You've just seen that last page. Illustrations, diagrams, charts, maps, sidebar, captions. Look through it, bubble in the ones that apply. Place a check mark next to the organizational structure used in the selection. So it is an argument in defense of a particular idea. Is it showing the cause and effect of two different things? Is it chronological and sequential, meaning that it's happening in a chronology, in order of time? Classification. Are different things being classified or identified? Is it a compare-contrast? Is it offering a definition? Is it a description of a particular thing, right? Is it being descriptive? not does it happen to describe things that happen. That wouldn't be the same. Place a check mark next to the author's purpose for writing the selection. Is it to inform, to entertain, to persuade? Is it trying to convince us to do something? Is it simply entertaining? Or is it meant to inform? You can probably guess that. List one opinion that is stating in the reading selection, and then you can pick any 3 important facts that you learned. Even if they're not new because you studied them last year, just write 3 facts that you learned from this section. All right. That is everything, and that gets you through today's assignment. I feel miserable, but I hope you're doing well, and I hope that this made the assignment a little bit more bearable for you. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you tomorrow.